start someplace, right? So we always start the show with kind of like a tip or talk about a neighborhood, and your homework for this week is Hubbard Farms. Some people call it Southwest Detroit. Hubbard Farms is a strip that used to literally be a farm. It's often associated with a Mexican-American population with some great food, some great bars, some great scene and good music down there. So you should head down to Southwest Detroit and check out Hubbard Farms. I looked at a fourplex yesterday right off 4th Street. And it's for sale for around $60,000. Each tenant pays $750. It's Section 8 rated, which means that if you're the landlord, you're guaranteed that income because it's government paid. So for $60,000, you can buy in Hubbard Farms, have 4 tenants, paying an average of $700 each. Property taxes are only around $300 a year, and the insurance is probably going to run you $1,200 to $1,500. It needs some maintenance, but with the right person or right personality, it could be a great investment. So if you're interested in a fourplex or a duplex, give me a call. You can give me a call at the station if you want. We're going to open up the phones today, 313-355-6018. And I want to remind you, you're listening to and watching WJZZ Cool TV, our podcast, and this is Motown Realty. So Hubbard Farms, take a look at that. I got a great fourplex down there with 4 decent tenants who are paying their rent for less than the price of a rental, standard rental for yourself individually. You get yourself into this property. You can live in one, then you're owner-occupied, then you're not paying the taxes that you would have to pay if you weren't owner-occupying. So Hubbard Farms, you got the train station, you got one of my favorite buildings in the city, the Orville Hotel. Yeah, Jack White, White Stripes, the Orville Hotel. Beautiful building down there. There's a lot going on in the Gordie Howe Bridge. And it's just kind of a fun, it's still got a little grit. You got the produce distribution center, some bad roads, and traffic's not good right now because nobody can go to Canada. So give me a call at the show, 313-355-6018 if you want to talk about some opportunities in Hubbard Farms. I opened it up to questions last week. And it was kind of fun. I went through a bunch of questions from people, and I had a couple I didn't get to, and I actually ran into one. Recently, I was showing a house on a block. It was in Northwest Detroit. That was Russell Woods area. And I ran into Alicia. I love Alicia. She's great. She is a speech therapist. She's buying a house for the first time. She's currently renting. And she came up to me and said, "Hey, listen, I'm gonna go ahead and buy the house. I'm planning for it. I got the down payment. I got everything done. My credit checked. I contacted the bank. I qualified for a loan." She says, "But I want to put my boyfriend's name on the title. How does that work? Do we need to be married?" And I said, "Well, Alicia, the first thing, don't get married. Why are you gonna get married? It's just a piece of paper, right? It just makes things far more complicated." So yeah, Alicia, I could tell you put the house in your name, and I know you love him and everything, but if you got the wherewithal, stick with it. Don't get married. But if you do choose to go into this transaction together, remember there's 2 different kinds of tenancies, if you will, when you're buying a house. And this came up yesterday with a couple too, where the girlfriend said to me, who was buying the house, she said, I love him now, but, I don't know what's going to happen. Should we be tenants in common or joint tenants? And it's a very confusing difference between tenants in common and joint tenants. And I'm a big fan of LegalZoom, so I am going to cite some information from LegalZoom, www.legalzoom.com. It's a great resource for anyone with a small business, an LLC, even for personal use. If you're doing small legal transactions and corporations of businesses, or you want to start a sole proprietorship, LegalZoom is a very cost-effective way to kind of start the process and get a better understanding, even setting up basic trusted estates for an heir. So I'm going to give you some of the more direct definitions from LegalZoom because it's the easiest way to really explain it in perfectly legal terms, and then I'll talk about it in real life terms. So tenancy in common is created by a deed, and that's where the previous owner transfers their interest to the new owner, the new tenants. So the tenants in common can get the property together from one owner, or they can each purchase or inherit their ownership from different previous owners at different times. I know, that's really, really, really confusing, right? Here's what you need to know. Tenants in common can sell their portion of the property individually and independent from one another, right? So we hear that expression like, I bought him out or she bought me out. You could do that with a partner, or you could sell to, if you're a tenant in common and you decide to break up with your dirtbag boyfriend or girlfriend or whatever the case may be, you can go ahead and sell out to somebody else. That's your right. It's your legal right. You're not obligated to buy them out. You're not obligated to have to do a payout or whatever. When it's set up properly, you can actually get out of your portion of the property and sell it to whoever you want. When you're joint tenants, you're also co-owners of real estate. But it's tenants in common. You can own disproportionate amounts of real estate. In other words, like Alicia, if you wanted to own 3/4, let your boyfriend own a quarter, you would still have 3/4 of it. He would only have a quarter of it. You can do that way. If you're joint tenants, it's 50-50, and so there's 50-50. There's always equal amounts of property owned by both partners. So 2 joint tenants, each owns 50%. If there were 3 joint tenants, they'd each own 1/3, and so on and so on. For the case of this, with getting into a house that you're paying for and you want to add someone onto the title who's a romantic interest, that joint tenancy, it allows you to sell your interest, but then if you sell, then it automatically converts to a tenancy in common. So there's a lot of tax ramifications too. The one thing that you'll want to remember is when you're a tenant in common and the other person passes away or disappears or whatever, goes witness protection, goes south of the border, whatever, I don't know, that individual's ownership rights are inherited by their heirs. So if you don't want the person you're moving in with to automatically get that property, if something were to happen to you, then that's the way to go. And then you need to set up an heir or some kind of trust in the estate, and that's where LegalZoom comes in. Or, of course, I am not an attorney, I'm not giving you legal advice. I'm just suggesting that these are things to explore when you want to move in together and you want to get married. Of course, if you ask me in all sincerity, I'm going to say don't get married. And if you move in together, you both keep your 50-50 and don't commingle funds, and the relationship will always be good, right? Because that's all anybody ever argues over with real estate is money. So again, taking calls today at 313-355-6018. I had, it's been interesting, this journey of starting with this program, and I talked last week about some basic terms, but I did have some questions from people that I work with who actually gave me a list of things that terms that they didn't understand. Every business has its nomenclature, every industry has its own verbiage, that kind of thing. It's easy for me to forget that some of these terms that we use all the time are a little alien to the general public. So I'm going to go through a list of general terms that people have asked me about in the last week. And we'll do it alphabetically. And I'm going to start with amortization. Okay? Anyone who's purchased a car or anything, even with a credit card, amortization is showing you the schedule of how the principal and the interest is paid out, right? It is a way to see if you're simply paying interest at the start or if you're paying interest and principal. Of course, if you're paying interest and principal, it'll give you more equity right away. So you all know this, right? If you have a credit card and you have 10% interest on it, and your interest payment per month is $25, and your principal and interest payment is $125, but they're saying that they're going to give you a break and just have you only pay the interest, that principal amount is going to continue to carry. You're not going to beat it down. So the amortization process combines both interest and principal in payments. Okay. And that's what you want to do when you get into a mortgage, whether it's FHA or VA or conventional, even especially a land contract, because you'll generally be paying more in interest rates. You want to amortize your payments to combine the principal and the interest, so you're not only paying for that money that you borrowed, but you're chipping away at the actual amount that you did borrow. Another question I got this week, we were talking about appraisals, and appraisals are not inspections. Appraisals are something that are done for a bank typically, or a hard money lender, which we'll get into at a different time. Anyone that's lending money on real property or real estate is going to want to do an appraisal, right, before they issue the loan. Because if you're loaning money against real property, you want to make sure that it is valued at the amount that you're loaning. Because, you know, in theory, anyone that's loaning you money to buy something runs a risk of you stopping your payments, and then they have no recourse but to take back the property. So when you go to buy a house and you want to do a conventional loan from Chase or anybody, Flagstar, they're all great products. I love our local Flagstar people. We've got great Flagstar people here in Detroit. They're going to send someone out to do an appraisal. Now, what is often confusing about appraisals is there are fair market and competitive and comparable market assessments, and then there are appraisals. The difference is, as a realtor, I can run reports, or any realtor can run reports, and we can tell you all day what houses are selling for in the area that you want to buy in, what the price per square foot is, what the updates and amenities are. We can do that all day, every day, and it can reflect what the market's doing. It can reflect what someone will pay. But what the bank will lend you is contingent upon what they deem to be a number that is acceptable or that appraises for the proposed sale price of the house, right? So appraisers are usually independent contractors that are hired, and they have to have a license and a certain amount of training and hourly continuing education, etc., etc. Not that terribly different from a realtor, but that's all they do. And they are ideally objective parties going into an area on behalf of a bank or a lender, could be a credit union, whatever, to determine if the property that you're asking for that money, that amount of money for, is actually worth it. Now, it's not an exact science. Everyone's a little different. There's some subjectivity to it. It's not hard and fast. You can get 3 appraisals from 3 different banks for the same property, and they'll all be different. Generally, they're in the same proverbial ballpark, but they'll all be different. So remember, an appraisal is what your bank is going to issue. So when someone says to you, I'm worried the house isn't going to appraise, I'll say to them, look, if you're willing to pay $10,000 more than the bank will appraise it at, like the house means that much to you, that's fine, but they're not going to loan you that money. You're going to have to bring that money to closing, that cash to closing. Just a quick reminder, you are listening to and watching WJZZ Cool TV and podcast. And we are taking calls today if anyone feels like giving me a ring at 313-355-6018. All right, so we talked about our hotspot for the week, Hubbard Farms. Train station, Yorba Hotel. Take a drive down there right now. Well, there's no tunnel, there's no bridge traffic into Canada. I got a great fourplex available with renters, so it's already income producing with marginal carrying costs. And we actually addressed Alicia's concern about moving in with her boyfriend, buying a house and moving in, and what his role and responsibility would be as a tenant in common or as a joint tenant. Very, very important that you understand those things before you go into a transaction with somebody, particularly if you're not married, because you want to make sure that your heirs will get your half of the property if you don't want it to automatically default to the other person that you own the property with. Something to think about, make a note of it. And we're on to more of our terms today. We're talking about amortization, the schedule for paying off the principal and the interest. It's really, really, really important, guys. Anytime you're going to buy something, don't get caught up in those interest-only payments. You see that stuff all the time. You know, the furniture stores, the appliance stores, interest-only. for a year or 2 years, but that principal is going to continue to grow, and you're going to be paying that interest on it. If it sounds too good to be true, it's too good to be true. If you're in a position to buy something and you can only afford to pay the interest, not the principal and interest, you're probably not in the position you think you are. I'm not sure if that made sense, but you might not be ready to buy. If you can't chip away at that principal and the interest, it might not be the right time for you to buy. Whatever it is, whether it's a TV or a house or a car, because otherwise you're just hemorrhaging your money and giving it back, right? You don't want to give it back. Banks have plenty of money. We need to have more money. All right, so in line with appraisals and appraised value, there's an assessed value. Now, the assessed value is somewhat tied to the appraisal and the fair market and the comparables, in the sense that there's a general consensus usually with property values. In the case of Detroit's a little wacky. There have been huge reassessments on properties to lower taxes to help people stay in their properties. Wanting to keep foreclosures low. The assessed value is what this, in short, simply put, it's what the city, the state, the municipality, the value they place on your home to determine how much your property taxes will be. Now, it sounds great when they say, oh, we're going to reassess your house and your assessed value goes down and your property taxes are going to go down. And that's normal. It fluctuates everywhere. Anywhere you go, anywhere. And you're like, great, my property taxes are going down. But then when you go to sell, you've got that working against you, that assessed value has changed. So just think about that. It's basically the public tax record, or what the public tax assessor deems the value of your property in order to base the property tax value. And that's going to tie into the state equalized value, which is generally half, 50% of, and it's a general rule of thumb, it's not hard and fast, but generally the rule of thumb, it's a good place to start at the state equalized value, or your heroes say SEV, we'll throw that around, and the SEV is 65. So generally speaking, a house that's in pretty good condition, that has fully functioning mechanicals, things that you would consider necessary to buy the house, to move in, you can double that SEV, and it'll give you an approximate value for the market. And then, of course, there's all those external factors, what people are paying, how much inventory there is, and then ultimately, when you get an offer on that house, and you agree upon a price, and then your buyer, when you're selling, and the buyer comes back and says, my bank will only loan me X amount of money, and you say, but we agreed on this price, they say that's what the appraisal says, then you have to make the decision, do I put it back on the market, do I wait for cash, or do you strong arm the buyer into saying, hey, if you really want it, you have to bring me the overage, and then you don't have the equity in the house that you would to start with. As a buyer, I would always recommend thinking very, very long and very hard about paying over value when a house doesn't appraise. Sometimes you might want to do that if, say, it has lake access, or there are certain intrinsic things to it, aspects to it. Sometimes people will live in, southeast Michigan, we got a lot of water. They will live in places where they're not on the water, but they have access to the water. And that has tremendous value for them. But because the houses aren't on the water, the appraisals are based on other houses not on the water that don't have access. But the amount of detail that goes into that doesn't always translate. So, somebody wants to buy a house with lake access, but they're not on the water. They're going to compare that tri-level, that 1,200 square foot tri-level, to another 1,200 square foot tri-level that doesn't have access to the lake, and they might put the price per square foot of both houses, because they're about the same age and about the same condition, they're going to put that about the same. So the bank's going to say, look, I'm not going to give you more for this one than that one, because if we have to take it back, we're stuck with what we think it's going to sell for. In a recent case where that happened, the buyer said to me, Heather, listen, this is really important to me. And I said, well, are you willing to pay more for the house than the bank will lend? And he said, I am, because the value of having access to the water and a dock and being able to do those things is worth, in this case, $5,000 to me. He said, I'm going to die in the house, I'm going to stay here forever. So in that circumstance, that buyer brought money to the closing table to make up for the difference that the bank wouldn't lend. That's a kind of a unique situation, but sometimes if you really want to be in a certain area, or there are benefits to it, or parks, or views, or water, or school systems, whatever that important thing is to you, if the appraiser and the bank is looking at it strictly from a price per square foot standpoint, and they're comparing apples to apples, the colonial to the colonial, the same size and about the same year build, etc., you might want to actually get a second appraisal, and if that one doesn't work out, then you can have a conversation with your realtor, a conversation with your partner if you have one, and really look at your finances and decide if the house is worth spending some of that cash on. Hope that makes sense. Let's see, what else did I get a question on? Buyer's agent. Somebody asked me, I said, we have a thing called a buyer agency agreement, and it basically just says that when you agree to work with a realtor, and they're going to invest their time, their money, their energy, their miles, their gas, in you to help you find a house, we often ask, and I don't ask right away because I'm very fortunate, I don't have a lot of issues with loyalty. I'm very, very lucky that way. I figure I take people out a couple times, they get to know me. If they're not going to work with me, they're not going to work with me. If they are, they are. People tend to be very loyal. Some agents will strong arm you into signing a buyer agency agreement, which basically says they are the only buyer's agent that you can work with, and anything that they show you, they will get the commission even if you go around them. So that's oversimplified. But signing a buyer agency agreement, although it makes a lot of sense for us as realtors, we have very few protections. I mean, we spin our wheels a lot. It makes tremendous sense for us, but as a consumer, I wouldn't sign a buyer agency agreement until I'd spent some time with the realtor. Because if you sign a 30-day buyer agency agreement, you have a buyer's agent that you're stuck with. If you don't like that person, or they're not performing for you, or they're not giving you what you need, or they're doing things that make you uncomfortable, like steering you to a certain neighborhood, or making suggestions of where to go and with whom you should, get your lender and your money and your title, you want to be able to get out of that. So a buyer's agent is exactly that. It's a realtor that is dedicated to you as the home buyer to find you a property, and invest our time, our money, our resources in you in exchange for your loyalty, so that when the property sells, we get paid by the seller. Actually, our broker gets paid by the seller, and then we get paid by our brokers. So that's basically the definition of a buyer's agent and buyer agency. Let's see, I had another question about dual agency. This is a great question. This actually came up yesterday. A dual agency is when a realtor, an agent like myself, represents both the seller and the buyer. And I know that sounds like a conflict of interest. It sounds like a common sense conflict of interest. And in some respects, there is a lot to be wary of. It is totally legal, it is completely permissible and above board as long as there's 100% transparency and everything's disclosed. A couple things to keep in mind about dual agency that scares a lot of buyers and sellers. I had one yesterday who said to me, she's got this property. She wants me to sell this property. I have a buyer that I've been looking for several weeks. So I say to her, hey, I got a buyer, it's perfect. The buyer's willing to give you the price, give you the terms. Basically, it's just like a win-win-win all around, right? And the buyer's excited because they've been having a hard time because houses sell so fast. So I take her, the buyer's offer, with the dual agency signed by both parties, and say to her, here's the buyer's offer. Now, she knows that there's a limitation to how much negotiation I can do for both parties, and I do have the best interests of both parties at heart. There is a certain value in this neighborhood and this type of house that there's just not a lot of, Detroit, Highland Park, there's not a lot of room in a lot of these price points. When you're looking at, say, $45,000 to $70,000, it's not like you're dealing with multi-million-dollar homes where someone might be tempted to pad it and make a little more money on their commission. This is pretty straightforward stuff, and that's when I think a dual agency makes sense, especially if you have good relationships and you've got experience working with the realtor. So I went to her and said, hey, this is a win-win. And she, as the seller, the seller pays the commissions in Michigan, right? She says, well, if you're going to do both sides, then I want a discounted commission. And I said, well, I don't really look at it that way. If anything, I should be making more because I'm saving you the hassle of leaving your house on the market, having strangers traipse through it all winter, having to winterize it, having to do all this stuff. I'm bringing you a qualified, vetted buyer. And in return, you're providing the house that he and I have been looking for so long. So I'm going to make my commission off of selling him a house, whether it's with you or someone else. And you're going to pay a buyer's agent, whether it's me or someone else. So if you find me valuable, which you say you do, and you want a quick sale, and you don't want people traipsing through your house, and you don't want to have the headaches of being on the market, and all the drawn-out stuff, and the carrying costs, and winterizing it, and paying your taxes, and worrying about getting the grass cut, it's a win-win. So a dual agency can work. It can work in your favor as a seller and as a buyer if you do your homework, do your research, find someone you work with that you can trust, and get yourself a solid working knowledge of what the prices are in the area. And work with your realtor. Ask them. Say, what did that house sell for? What did that house sell for? What did that house? Don't just trust Zillow. Talk to them. Put them to work. Thanks for tuning in today. This is Motown Realty. It is real information about real estate for real people on WJZZ Cool TV and podcast. If anyone feels like calling in, so far nobody's called in, but if you feel like it, 313-355-6018, ask the realtor. I'll do my best to answer your question. All right, another term, keep your notepads out, your pencils out, stay sharp, that we throw around a lot that I've had people say to me recently, like, I don't really understand it. Is it a stupid question? It's not. And that is equity. So equity is the amount of a property or an object or any kind of real property, if you will, that you own in relation to what is owed on it. So if you have a house, and I think like the parents, the baby boomer generation, a lot of parents, like my mom, moving out of the city. By the time she moved into an apartment, the house was paid off, right? So she had 100% equity in that house, which means that when she sells it, she gets all the proceeds, of course, less any taxes that she owes or any payments that she owes to contractors, people that worked on the house, but she doesn't owe the bank anything. So your equity gives you, the amount of equity you have gives you a lot of leverage and financial flexibility. Think about having more equity in kind of like an abstract way of having good credit. Equity puts you in a better position. I say this all the time, and it's true. And this country, it's like we have this bizarre system where the less money you have, the more you have to pay, the more you're punished, and the more money you have, the less you pay. If you say, I wouldn't have bounced the check if I had the extra $35 to cover the $8, I wouldn't have bounced the check. So now I owe you $8 plus $35. I just can't get out of the hole. It doesn't make sense to me. But since you guys are listening and you're smart and you're going to invest in your real estate, one thing that you'll want to think about long and hard as you go into it is equity. So if you don't overpay, if you put a good down payment on, and you stay on top of your payments, principals, and interest, your amortization schedule, like we talked about earlier, you will own more of your home, your property. That feeling when you pay off your car and you own it? Well, it depends. I don't know. I'm not real big on cars. I can't fix anything, so I never get that point. But that's kind of like that freedom, that flexibility. The other thing that equity gives you is the ability to use your property to borrow money. So when we think about lending and loaning, right, you need collateral. And collateral is just basically real property or objects that can be used to make up for money that you might stop paying. In other words, it's the repo man, right? You don't pay for your car long enough, they send you a note, then they send you a nastier note, then they call you, then they blow up your phone, then they show up at your door with a flatbed and they take your car, right? You don't want that. The more equity you have, the less likely it is that you're going to ever be in that position, because you'll be paying less in interest, less in fees and penalties. It's kind of like having good credit. Having good credit and good equity on a property will put you in a position of favor when you want to borrow money. So if you own 50% of your house and you've got good credit, and you go to your bank and you say, look, I owe you 50% on my mortgage, but I need to send my kid to college, or I need a car, or I have high interest credit cards I need to pay off. Typically home loans and home mortgages have lower interest rates than consumer debt, like credit cards, or cars tend to be a little lower too. So if you've got credit cards with a 12 or 13% interest, say you've got $5,000 in medical bills, right? And you have it on a credit card, and it's accruing 12, 13% interest, and it's piling up and piling up and piling up, right? You can go to the bank once you have equity in your property and say, I would like to borrow more or mortgage more against my property. You can use it as collateral. If I default, you can take my house back, to borrow lower interest money. So you always want to be into your property, into your house as much as possible, and at the sacrifice of other things. I don't care if you pack your lunch, or make your own coffee, or, do what you have to do. All the little things add up, right? Because when you've got a property and you've got equity, that is it's like your golden ticket. You have something that you can use as leverage to borrow money at a lower interest rate and pay off higher interest rates, which is basically how people make money and get richer, right? I mean, there's this adage that rich people or the wealthy never use their own money, and it's true. There's this, it's very complex, but in the most simplistic way, you don't use your own money. You can use your house as collateral because you know you're going to make your payments. They're not going to get your house. But because you've been good and disciplined, you'll take the value of the house, borrow it back, pay off those credit cards, tell the credit card companies to take a hike, cut them up, and then you're actually saving yourself considerable money. There are also a lot of tax laws and property tax deductions with your taxes that you can take that are beneficial, but I think that's just too much to go into. The important thing to remember is that you always want to have equity in your house. You always want to own part of your house. You don't want the bank to own the whole thing. When we hear about people being quote-unquote upside down on their homes, it means that they owe more than the bank and the bank's appraiser currently believes it's worth. And it sounds kind of wacky. There's some subjectivity to it there. I understand that. But ultimately, follow the money, right? Money makes everything go around, whether we like it or not. So that's something that is going to really, really, really work hard for you, that equity. Let's see, what else did I have? Oh, somebody asked me about inspections. What is an inspection? We talk about that buying a house. An inspection is like, if you've ever rented, you know how you go into, most people have at least rented, even if it was in college or at some point. You go into the rental, you sign your lease, you go in, and if you have a good property manager, you have an inventory list, right? You have a little sheet of paper that says oven, good condition, bad condition, whatever, and it has places for you to make notes, like there's a stain on the carpet in the living room, or there's a hole in the bedroom wall where the doorknob went through. You basically take an inventory of everything in that apartment before you actually take occupancy, so that you have documented proof that you didn't do that damage, so they don't keep your security deposit. Well, an inspection is a little bit like that. You buy the you make the offer is accepted, you send everything to the bank, they order the appraisal, and you have this inspection, and you say to your realtor, well, why do I need an inspection? Well, you need an inspection because, first of all, realtors are realtors. We're not attorneys. We can't give legal advice. We're not builders. We're not contractors unless you have a builder that is a licensed builder, contractor, or attorney. I'm not. Most of us aren't. You want to know if there's anything in the house that might be a very, very large expense or something that would make the house not habitable or would jeopardize your equity or the appraisal value later on. So we hire professional inspectors to come in. Now, there's different kinds of inspectors. There's home inspectors, and a general home inspector, you can get a recommendation for one. You can ask around. Sometimes people know licensed builders, or if you're a contractor yourself and you don't want to do an inspection, that's your prerogative if you feel as though you're expert enough to look for any faults or flaws that I'm certainly not going to vouch for, or the average person is not going to. So you have the home inspector, and the home inspector, you hire them. It's usually about $350 to $400, but it can be the best $400 you spend because they will come in while your offer is accepted, but while you still have time to get out of it. And they're going to tear the house apart. Well, not literally, but figuratively. They're going to go on the roof, in the attic. They're going to look for mold. They are going to go on the roof. They're going to look for spots that might need repair. They're going to check the flashings. They're going to check the chimneys, the chimney chase, the chimney caps, the roof vents, the baffles, the soffits. These are all things, right? Like, for some of us, they all make sense, but for most of us, it's just all, as they say, Greek, right? You don't know what they're talking about. So this person comes in. I don't want to be sexist. There are females out there. It's generally a guy. So the guy comes in, right, and he's got all this expert knowledge about construction, structural, foundation, molds, water entry, grading, all these kinds of things, and we'll do an exhaustive search on the house looking for items that need to be repaired or replaced, or items that are in danger, or that there's an imminent matter, i.e., the roof is going to go in a certain section. There's rot, and the shingles need to be pulled off. Like, that's not something we're going to be able to see, right? But the inspector's going to go up into the attic with the flashlights, with what they need, if they need to test the mold, and they're going to find that. And they're going to do a very extensive report, usually like 40 or 50 pages. And it'll come back with pictures, and it comes to you and your realtor, and it outlines everything on there that needs to be fixed or repaired, and kind of like what the general threshold is for it. In other words, if the inspector comes back and says, the roof is in fair condition, probably has about 5 years left on its life, you can't use that as a negotiating tool, because as long as it works or it's functioning at the time of purchase, it doesn't matter. The seller doesn't have to concede anything. They don't have to. What might happen is not their responsibility, but it is your problem. So if you're going into a house and the inspector says, yeah, the roof's pretty good right now, but you might have 5 years and you have to replace it, you have to get your head around the fact that you might have to come up with $7,500 to replace your roof in the next 5 years. And if that's not something you're in a position to do, you can ask the seller to repair it. If they say no, it might just, or reduce the price, it might just make sense to walk away from them. So home inspections are critical. Inspections keep us from getting into trouble. They stop us from finding money pits. There's the house inspection, which I just described. There's also the sewer inspection, which is often, people often skip it. Like, oh yeah, I'm sure it's fine, I'm sure it's fine. And doing a sewer inspection or sewer line inspection is another one of the best things you can ever do. It's the best $175 you'll ever spend, and I'll tell you why. Sewer lines that run, or septics, but we'll say sewers because we're in Detroit and most municipalities have sewers. there's the line in the basement or out in the yard. We call it a clean out, right? It's an access point to get to it in case something you have to get down there and snake it. That pipe that runs from your house to where it meets the municipal access or the city's lines, that's your responsibility. It's on your property. So if within that typically 40 to 60 feet of line there's a problem, it's on you. So you have to pay to have the yard dug up, have the pipe replaced, have everything, reconnected, and get the inspector out and make sure everything's in working order. So the home inspection is critical, and the sewer inspection or sewer camera is also very, very critical. Don't ever skimp on that. I hear so many horror stories about people that say, oh, I'll pass, and the house is 100 years old, and they get in, and the last homeowner was a single grandma, and she did 3 loads of laundry a week and took 4 showers and consumed very little water, and there's no problems and the drains are fine. And the family moves in, they start doing laundry and taking showers and running water, and all of a sudden the basement's full of sewage because those pipes have roots grown in, or they have buildup, or they might even be partially collapsed. So inspections are critical. You hire professionals, you do pay for them. Your realtor can make a recommendation. We don't pay for them. That's a conflict of interest. You pay for them. It's your report. You're the customer. If you choose to share it with your realtor to try to negotiate on the sale price, that's one thing. But again, remember, that's your information. You don't need to give it out to anyone. The seller might want to coax you out of it. Oh, tell us what it is. It's your property. You decide what to do with it. Either pass on the house or stay with the house. Thanks for joining us. WJZZ Cool TV and podcast. Motown Realty. Real information about real estate for real people. Another thing that we talked about the buyer agent, right? People say, I don't really understand the difference between a buyer's agent or a listing agent or a realtor or a broker. A realtor is somebody like me who works for a broker, and we specialize in the transactions, the purchase and sale of real property, real estate, in my case multifamily, some light commercial or mixed use, and residential, single family homes and multifamily homes. So as a buyer's agent, I'm out there to protect you. You don't have to pay me. I help you find a property, navigate the negotiations, get the inspections, make sure the title work is all clear, and then help you close on that house, right? As a listing agent, when you go to sell your house, this is the agent that represents you in the sale of your house. This is the agent that you interview. Maybe you might want to interview 4 or 5, right? Have them come to the house, have them walk around, give you an evaluation. Don't necessarily go with the listing agent that gives you the highest number that they think they can get. Some agents, some list agents will, and this is known, I'm not throwing anyone under the bus, but this is a known practice. Sometimes agents will tell you as the seller, oh yeah, I can get XYZ for this house. And then 3 other agents will come in and give you numbers, and they're all very close, but they're considerably lower than the numbers that other agent gave you. So you say, okay, well, great. So agent A says they can get me $200,000 for the house, and agents B, C, and D all say they can get me $189,000 for the house, or whatever it is. It's less than what agent A says. So the truth of the matter is, if you've got 3 agents that are all coming in around the same number, and they're local, they know the market. If you're buying and selling in Detroit, you got to get somebody who knows Detroit. It's a weird market. You got to get somebody who knows Detroit. If the 3 of them are all coming in plus or minus $2,000, $3,000, and then this 4th agent comes in and says, oh, I can get you $15,000 more than what they said. The instinct is to sign with them, right? Of course it is. But remember, that's just one person and one realtor, and we don't determine the market. So getting a listing for us is a great way. It's like our way to get leads. We put our sign in the lawn, people call us. We're on the multiple listing service. It's a way for us to generate more business. And there are situations where we really genuinely think we can get more for the house than we ultimately do. We make the best effort we can to value it properly and to sell it for you. But wary of a listing agent that comes in and says, yeah, I can get you this, this, and this, because you may be sitting on that property for a long time if it's overpriced, while the agent is getting calls from the sign that's stuck in your lawn and everything online and building up a client base and holding open houses, which is another business tool for us. So just like with a buyer's agent, with a listing agent, you want to have confidence. You want to feel good about it. You want to make sure that they are buttoned up and that they have your fiduciary, they are in the best interest of you from a fiduciary standpoint and also from a cooperative standpoint. You want someone you can get along with. You're opening your home to them, right? We talked last week about open houses and pets, invasion of privacy, how unsettling that is. Your listing agent is going to dictate how those things work. Your listing agent is going to tell you how the showings are going to work and how you'll be informed as to who is in your house and when and how we keep records of it. Your listing agent is going to vet the offers that come in and make sure that the offers coming in make sense and they have the right paperwork. So having a buyer's agent is important. You need to have a buyer's agent to find a house. But to sell a house, that listing agent is really, really critical. You need to make sure you're very, very comfortable with them. Let's see. A couple other things. Oh gosh, there's so many things. So many questions this week. It's a little overwhelming. And the world's kind of on fire right now, and everybody's trying to figure out what to do. And I'm saying, well, if you want to put your money somewhere, put it in a house, right? Because we don't know what's going to happen with the markets and everything else. And if nothing else, get out of a rental situation that is not one that you like, or a bad rental situation, because I can probably get you into a house for less than what you're paying in rent. Certainly in Detroit, certainly in Wayne County. All right, listing agent, and then the actual listing, right? We say a listing ticket or list the house. It's kind of an old-fashioned term, like real estate before the interwebs and before the Zillow and before all that stuff, right? Realtors would go out, have the agreement, sign the paperwork at the kitchen table, photograph the home, develop the photographs, and put together a binder. Excuse me. Put together a binder, and potential buyers would go to the office, make an appointment, and the listing agent would say, okay, here's the house, or here's what we have available. And you would flip through the books, and you would look at the list, and you'd see what houses were for sale on the list. We still refer to it as a listing because we still list it on the multiple listing service, or the MLS. And the MLS is the standardized record that licensed realtors who pay to subscribe to this and have access to it, that's attached to public data records, tax information, surveyor's information. That listing is from where all the consumer websites pull, right? Like Zillow, Realtor.com, Trulia, all of them. So that is kind of like the holy grail right there, to be on the MLS, because that information is deemed as accurate as possible. The consumer websites, if you are going to list on Zillow, say, without going through a licensed realtor and getting on the MLS, there's really no guarantees that you're listing that the information is correct. Remember that these websites are consumer websites. If you read the fine print, if you look at them, they're there to make money. They do provide a service. They charge realtors to be on there and have our names on there. We have to pay to get our own listings back to show that we are the listing agent, which is a whole other thing to talk about. But you want to make sure that your listing is correct, it's on the best resources possible, and that you're going through a licensed agent who has access and membership with the MLS. So the listing and listing agent kind of goes hand in hand. Let's see, we'll do a couple more. We've got time for a couple more. We talked about amortization and principal and interest. So I'll just touch on principal. This is a term. I would say most people know what this is, but again, I've had people come up and ask me things that I realized I was remiss in just assuming that all these things made sense to everybody. The principal is the amount of money that you initially borrowed. So if you pay $23,000 for your car and it's amortized with the interest schedule, the $23,000 is what you need to pay down in order to get that interest down, right? Because the interest is compounded against the principal. So it's what allows you to build equity. It's pretty straightforward, right? The principal is the principal, it's not the interest. Some other, next week I think I might have someone to talk about title insurance. Title insurance, clearing title, chain of title, all of that kind of stuff. That's a little bit of a mystery for a lot of people until you actually get into the home buying process. Titles go, when you think about, I'm going to make you go back to high school here, right? When you think about history, and you think about feudalism, and, we still call them landlords, right? We think about property ownership and who owns it and what's owned, the actual title of the home needs to be clear of any previous interests. In other words, if you buy a piece of property and it's purchased for the first time from a developer or a farmer or whatever the case may be, and they're the original owner of that property, or they have proof of going back to the original owner, that land is free and clear. Then you build a house. You're the original owner of the house, so you know that the title, the property in your name, you're the only interest that has your hands on that property. When you buy a pre-owned home or a used home, whatever you want to say, a secondary market home, there is a chance that previous owners still have what is referred to as an interest. So there are ways to record deeds and there are ways to handle property transactions, and if they're not done right, if they're not done thoroughly, and registered with the county and registered with the clerk and the register of deeds, those people can still show up as possible owners. So you need to hire a title company, again, something a realtor can help you with, that will go back about 25 years and clear all of those interests. In other words, they have access to information that will show all the records and all the data, and maybe there's somebody on there that was quitclaim deeded on that was never taken off. And they will go to that person through a process called FOIA, Freedom of Information Act, and they will reach out to them and say, do you know that you still are shown as an interest on this property, or do you still want to have interest in this property, or is there a reason why you would need something from the person owning this property? Sometimes it's a contractor, it's a lien, we say a lien or an encumbrance, and it shows up and they say, they owe me $2,000 and I'm not going to take the lien off the house, I'm not going to back down until they pay it. So the title company will go back to those interests and say, all right, what do we need to do to remedy this? And they'll tell you, and they'll come back to the seller and make sure that everything is paid off and everything is taken care of. And that chain of title is clear and clean. There are ways you can go down to City Hall and do, Register of Deeds, the clerk's office, and do what we call a quit claim deed, not a quick claim deed, although that makes sense, a quit claim deed. And it's basically where one entity gives the other entity the property or access to the property or partial ownership of the property, and you pay a fee to the Register of Deeds, and they put that deed through. Now, if those are never cleared or changed, those people throughout those chains of quit claims can come back to haunt you. So title insurance is literally that. It's an insurance policy that the seller pays for to insure or guarantee that the property that you're buying, the property that they're selling, has no interest, no skeletons in the closet. Nobody was going to come out of the woodwork and say, oh yeah, well, I own part of that because my great aunt's sisters, whatever, knew that, we had a farm and I have interest in it. So that's the basics of title insurance. It's something you need. So it's been a lot today, right? We covered a lot of stuff. We talked about tenants in common, joint tenancy. We talked about principal, interest, amortization, title insurance. We talked about the roles of a buyer's agent and a listing agent, the importance of a proper listing with your house. Next week, we're gonna have some information about taxes and estate planning next week. And I don't want you to think that that's only for people with big expensive properties. I don't care if you own a $50,000 home. If you do or do not have children or heirs, these are all things we need to do because you want to keep the state out of your business and your business out of the state. Thanks so much. I'll see you next week.